would like, if I may, to take you on a strange journey.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Real Estate Realities with the Rebel Broker. My name's Robert Whitelaw, and I am the Rebel Broker. Licensed real estate broker in the state of California, member of the National Association of Realtors. But please, don't hold that against me. We've got some good little nuggets today, some interesting stuff to think about, some news on foreclosures, some updates on seller expectations, and another little tidbit from the Trump transition team on what they're going to be doing. It was interesting to see a mention of this so soon on the heels of him winning, so it clearly indicates that this is at least in the top 5 or 10, I guess, of their to-do list when they get into power. So this, and it definitely affects us in terms of real estate, so we'll chat about that. If you'd like to get in contact with me, the best way is to head on over to therebelbroker.com. From there, you can get all kinds of wonderful things done. First, you can send me a message with any ideas, suggestions, observations, or questions that you might have. Also, if you would like to join in and be included in the drawing for a $50 Amazon gift card, all you need to do is click that wonderful red button at the tippy top of the page. It's titled, Take the Survey to Support the Show. Use the same email address both times you're asked, and then answer the other 5 or 6 questions that are on the survey. And once you've done that, you are entered. And the next time we do our drawing, which will be the beginning of December, we've already done a drawing in October and November. So we've already handed out $100. Congratulations to the listeners who won that chunk of cash. But it's not over yet. So get your name in there. Just jump through that quick survey. You're not only getting yourself in a drawing to potentially win $50, you're also helping to support the show. So I appreciate everyone who's taken the time to do that. Of course, there's tweaks going on to the website, so right now you can head over there, and if you're going to do any shopping on Amazon, you can head over to the website and click on Support the Show, and then one of the options is Amazon Store. Go in there, and of course, there are books in there now and some other things that are real estate related. That's going to continue to grow as I add more things to that. But you can shop for anything in that store, and it doesn't cost you anything more than if you went to Amazon directly, but you do benefit the show when you do that. And then, of course, there will also be the sponsors page, the sponsors and partners page. So once you go there, for instance, if you want to get involved with Audible and I love Audible. I've been using it now for the books that I get on my device, on my smartphone. What's cool about it is if you buy the audio version of it, and then you also, with a lot of them, if you buy then the Kindle version, the e-reader version, they'll synchronize, which is probably the coolest feature I've ever seen. So if I'm reading the digital book and I get to a certain page, when I now jump over to Audible and kick that off in my car while I'm driving around looking at properties, it's going to start where I left off. And I think that's just plain cool. So feel free to take a look at that. And if you're going to do Audible anyway, and of course, because you're doing it through one of my sponsors, you're going to get a first month free and your first book is free. So make sure to take advantage of that. It's a great little service if that's how you like to consume your books these days. All right. Where shall we start? Let's go ahead and start with the Trump transition team. Now, this one comes to us from the Wall Street Journal. We talked about this the other day, and we spent a little time theorizing what might be on the horizon based on what the Republican Party platform was talking about as it related to real estate, but also trying to cobble together some things that have been mentioned here or there. Well, today, we got absolute firm statements that indicate the direction that the administration is going to go with this. According to the article, President-elect Donald Trump's transition team has promised to dismantle the 2010 Dodd-Frank law, declaring that the coming administration will seek to remake the way the U.S. oversees the financial sector. which is a far more broad statement than just we're going to deal with Dodd-Frank. Up until now, Congress has sort of been nibbling around the edges of Dodd-Frank, figuring out what to do with it. And a lot of that had to do with the fact that there really was no practical path to getting it passed, because the Obama administration had really kind of already communicated that if it did end up coming to them, he was likely to veto it. There was likely a lot of resistance to the Dodd-Frank Act, and this has sort of melted all of that away. So it sounds like they may try to bite off more of this than they were previously pushing for. Mr. Trump's commitment to focus on the issue has the GOP salivating over a wish list of Dodd-Frank changes that until recently stood little chance of avoiding President Obama's veto pen. The lineup includes everything from regulatory exemptions for community banks and regional banks to a new regime for insurers and asset managers to curbs on the federal government's influence over consumer finance products such as mortgages and payday loans. The brief note on Mr. Trump's new website was the first time since Tuesday's election that the president-elect addressed financial regulatory policy. It was consistent with Mr. Trump's campaign trail rhetoric, blaming the blame. Don't care about blame. The financial crisis for a tepid economy and promising to, quote, replace it with new policies to encourage economic growth and job creation. Another sign that Mr. Trump may make Dodd-Frank overhaul a priority is the news that his transition team is considering a candidate for Treasury Secretary, one of the leading critics of Dodd-Frank on Capitol Hill. People familiar with the matter said that in Trump aides' preliminary discussions about possible candidates to fill that slot, they are looking at Texas Representative Jeb Hensarling, the chairman of the House Financial Services Committee, who has crafted a deregulatory alternative to the 2010 law. We actually talked about, if I'm not mistaken, we talked about some of the things he was suggesting back in a previous show. If you'd like to check out that previous show, in yesterday's show notes, as promised, I included a link to a related show I had done a few months back talking about some of the Dodd-Frank changes that were moving through Congress. Let's see here. Talk of deregulation has helped fuel a rally in bank stocks this week. After struggling for much of 2016, bank stocks rose sharply Wednesday and Thursday. The KBW NASDAQ Bank Index now is up nearly 12% on the year, about double the gain in the S&P 500. Banks, by and large, would welcome a re-examination of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau and other elements of Dodd-Frank, but they also have much invested in the law, which they point to as evidence that bailouts are a thing of the past. Goldman Sachs Group Incorporated CEO Lloyd Blankfein said at a conference sponsored by the New York Times on Thursday that it, quote, could be appropriate to look at repealing some parts of Dodd-Frank, but he added that he wouldn't want to repeal in toto. And the thing I'd really love to see happen is that the one thing that's always annoyed me is the institutions like Goldman Sachs, frankly, and others that are insulated from risk, but then completely get to enjoy the upside. They should own the downside, frankly, I think. We shouldn't own the downside. They should. And when they do stupid things and their banks suffer as a result of it, if they've done things stupidly enough, absolutely they should be able to go into bankruptcy. Bankruptcy is a perfectly natural thing. It is the death of a company, just like there's a life and death of people. There are lives and deaths of corporations. And nothing negative happens to any of the folks who have been financed through these institutions. Their note that they owe, the mortgage they owe, simply becomes an asset that'll then get purchased by some other third party. Everything that, for instance, let's pretend some new financial institution that now owns all of its stupidity does something dumb in terms of lending and the floor falls out and they go out of business. Well, it's not like that hurts the consumer. What ends up happening is now dozens of other smaller banks buy up those assets, and what we end up with, instead of a smaller number of banks, we end up with a larger number of banks. And the last time we had the opposite happen. We had a bailout occur only for the biggest banks. So what you saw was a consolidation. You had fewer banks once that was all said and done. That's a bad thing for you as a consumer, because the more banks that are out there creating a product, competing for your money. Because remember, That's what a mortgage is. It's a product, just like anything else, whether you're going to buy a car or a TV or anything else. Everybody out there is advertising their product, which is a loan. They're advertising an interest rate, they're advertising terms and conditions, and that also comes to the terms of how long the loan is, how many points you have to pay, what the interest rate is, all of these things. Those are all just parts of the product. So by having more banks out there offering a lending product, you benefit as a consumer. These are all things that ultimately help folks who want to borrow money, not hurt them. The only people who get hurt when we let these companies fail is the big dogs, right? Who are sort of in charge of these things. So I think that's kind of an interesting thing to note. I can't wait to see where this stuff goes. I can't help but think there's an awful lot of influence because there's so much back and forth. We get so many folks who work at these big banks or big institutions and then go into politics and then go from politics into these big institutions. I'd love to see a nice separation between those two groups of folks so that they don't get this sort of crony capitalist thing happening anymore between the institutions involved and the government. Let's see. There was something else I wanted to share. Mr. Hensarling's bill is built around a trade-off. Banks can free themselves from various regulations, such as tough stress testing, as long as they maintain capital equal to at least 10% of total assets and high ratings from their regulator. This would be a dramatic improvement. Remember, we've talked about this before where a lot of them only keep 3% on hand. That would immediately help many small, locally focused banks that tend to be better capitalized, but not necessarily mega banks with sprawling international operations that generally have capital levels below that level. Mr. Hensarling said he would try to convince Mr. Trump's team to support his approach instead of their campaign trail promise to reinstate the Depression-era Glass-Steagall law separating traditional lending from investment banking. Glass-Steagall, it would be interesting. It would be interesting to do a show on Glass-Steagall. To be really honest with you, my experience with that is more from the days when I taught history than anything else. But that would be an interesting one to discuss, I think, because there are definite downsides to just have to that particular option. So if we do start to move towards that direction, if people start embracing that as an idea, we can actually have a deeper chat about that. Hensarling's bill also would make other significant changes, such as requiring that many financial regulations be subject to cost-benefit analysis for the first time and tying the budgets of regulatory agencies, including the CFPB, to congressional appropriations. The CFPB has enjoyed a high level of independence by getting its funds from revenues insulated from the legislative process. Totally cracking this open. I know a lot of folks might be freaking out that these sorts of things are being discussed, but if we can get into a situation where folks are willing to really crack open some of these things and debate the usefulness of them, or whether or not they actually help people, or whether or not they're really in final consideration actually hurting more than they're helping, that's a great discussion to have. So I don't think there's a downside yet, but let's see how this materializes. Maybe I'm just a little bit too jaded, but I can't help thinking that, like with so many other things, industry leaders will be invited to participate in forming this reform. And invariably, when you invite the folks you're actually trying to regulate into the discussion, there ends up being sweetness for those folks, right? They create things that make it difficult for other folks to compete with them, and they build in things that give them sort of a platinum parachute, so that taxpayers are on the hook in really bad situations, because they want to push this whole, well, we're too big to fail sort of mantra. So I hope we can get past that. I hope that doesn't become a thing, because it shouldn't be. At least I don't think it should be. If you disagree with me, feel free to reach out. You can contact me either at therebel@therebelbroker.com, or you can just head on over to the website at therebelbroker.com and offer your thoughts. All right, folks, I'm going to take a quick break right here, but in a minute we'll come back and we'll talk about a couple of the other two topics I kind of had on cue for today. So don't go anywhere. We're going to be right back. Are you ready to jump in and start your search for your first investment property? Maybe you've decided that it's time to own your own home, or maybe you're ready to sell your home and move on to something new. No matter what your goal is, the Rebel Broker can help. That's right, aside from hosting this show, I am also the owner-broker of Whitelaw & Sons Real Estate Services right here in Silicon Valley. With over 25 years experience serving Silicon Valley, Morgan Hill, San Martin, and Gilroy, I or one of my great agents can help you achieve your goals in real estate. So if you're ready to look into taking that next step towards achieving your real estate goals, point your browser at www.soldbyrobert.com. That's www.soldbyrobert.com and get in touch. Let me show you how I will earn your business and your respect. Again, that's www.soldbyrobert.com, or you can call me at 408-852-0525. California Bureau of Real Estate ID 00984-909. Hello, everyone, and welcome back. We were just going through a bit of an update from the Trump camp relating to some Dodd-Frank news that came out, and how it clearly is becoming a top item for them in terms of things they want to tackle. And if we want to sort of categorize it, it sounds to me like, because of the amount of attention they're spending on this, it sounds like something that they would want to do to make part of their first 100 days thing. You know, every new administration that comes in kind of has that first 100 days set of goals that they want to reach. It sounds like that's what this is. This will definitely be something that would end up on that relatively short list. So it'll be interesting to see how this moves forward. And of course, as always, we'll continue to track it here so we can try to figure out what effect it might have on our practical experiences in day-to-day real estate. Moving on to some of the other bits of news that I wanted to cover today. We're starting to see a little bit more of a correlation between what sellers expect to get versus what they're getting. You might remember we've been covering this number for a long time now. And for a while, a year ago, sellers were underestimating what they could get for their homes. So the market had kind of gone beyond what folks' expectations were. And then slowly in the early part of this year, expectations on the part of sellers really sort of started to outpace what they were getting. And this is relating to appraisals. So this is a number that I like to look at because in a lot of ways, it's going to give you a little bit of insight into what you're going to encounter when you're out there making offers. And since there is clearly a disconnect, it indicates that you're going to find situations where properties are more likely to be overpriced when sellers are really pushing for an amount that they believe the home is worth. But then when the home gets appraised, there's a disconnect. Perceived home prices have grown closer to appraised value within the last month. Now, we've talked about numbers before in terms of how much of a difference there was. This is an article that comes to us from Housing Wire. And again, you'll be able to check any of the items we're discussing in today's show. Links to the articles will be available in the show notes. So make sure to check those out if you want to get a little bit more deeper into it. Homeowners continue to struggle with regards to estimating their home value, but they're getting closer. They are now pricing their homes 1.15% higher than the appraisal value in October, and that's according to Quicken Loans' Home Price Perception Index. While homeowners are still pricing their homes too high, the gap has narrowed from last month. So, and this has actually been continuing to sort of narrow a little bit. And it's one of those things where it's more of a psychological thing. You can also use, if you can figure this out, I don't know if there are regional numbers for this. I've actually never seen it. Whenever I've seen Quicken release these numbers, it's sort of just been the national number. But in terms of using this to get an idea of where the expectations are on the part of sellers, my suggestion here is to link this with what you're seeing in terms of the real world performance. In other words, make sure that with your real estate agent, before you're making an offer, you're having them do the exact same sort of competitive market analysis that they would have done for the seller if the seller had asked them to come in and potentially list their home for them. You want to have data. That's what's going to explain it for you. But the great news here is that this indicates that you may find yourself in situations where what that list price is out of whack from where it should be, simply because in general, sellers are still continuing to have a higher estimation of value than appraisals are supporting. Now, as I mentioned, I'd really love for this to have a much more granular layout in terms of what folks' expectations are, but they do give kind of a good chart here that that lays out some different metro areas. So let me just read down these really quickly and give you an idea, because remember, ground truth is what it's all about. So some of these areas, the area where you live may be different from what we're talking about in terms of the average. So let's start with the areas where an appraiser's opinion are higher than homeowners' estimates. And so that, in other words, the potential list price may actually be below what an appraiser ascertains the value is at that time. So way up there at 3% is Denver. Next is San Francisco, then Portland, then Dallas, then Seattle, then Los Angeles, then Boston, Minneapolis, San Diego, then Charlotte. Miami is sort of, folks are kind of hitting it right on the nose. And then the rest of these communities that we're going to talk about are ones where the appraiser opinion is lower than the homeowner estimates. And a lot of these communities are not going to surprise you. Detroit is the worst in terms of estimates. It's a 2.5%. Sellers are overestimating the value of their home by 2.5%. Chicago, Cleveland, Tampa, New York, Las Vegas, Atlanta, Phoenix, and Washington, D.C. So those are the folks who are going to be unpleasantly surprised in terms of what their homes are actually worth. And some of these percentages are gigantic. This can, depending on the price range where you are, 2 to 3% is frequently at least half of what the commission is that's being paid to the real estate agents. So we can talk about some pretty big numbers here, and these can absolutely be guides for you to figure out how to recalibrate your potential offer based on perceptions versus the realities that sellers are out there pushing on the values of their home. Let's see. CoreLogic is the next place I wanted to visit today. Completed foreclosures reverse trend, but increase. So the inventory of foreclosures is down, but we've actually started to see an increase in the number of folks who are past due. Now, completed foreclosures increased monthly in September. However, it could be a good sign as foreclosure inventory actually decreased, showing that the market is clearing out the current foreclosures faster than the new foreclosures begin. So inventory decreased by 31.1% annually in September and by 3.1% monthly, according to the September 2016 National Foreclosure Report from CoreLogic. On the other hand, completed foreclosures, while still decreasing 7% from last year, increased 5.2% from last month, from 34,000 to 36,000 in September. So the foreclosure inventory represents the number of homes at some stage of the foreclosure process, while completed foreclosures are the total number of homes lost to foreclosures. Quote, completed foreclosures have fallen by a total of more than 100,000 homes during the 12 months prior to September 2016. The decline in foreclosures is one of the drivers in the drop in vacancies, which is positive for homeowners and communities. Heading into 2017, we see that prices, performance, and production, the three most important drivers of the real estate market, are all improving. So we've talked about these kinds of numbers before, and it's interesting that on a month-to-month basis, we've seen an increase in foreclosures. I normally wouldn't make a big deal out of that, since primarily you want to focus on year-to-year changes. This is one of those things that tends to be a little bit different, though. For foreclosing in terms of seasons, you actually tend to see fewer foreclosures this time of year. You actually usually see a downturn in the number of foreclosures that move through the process all through the winter months, going through November, December, and into January. And then they sort of pick it back up again after the new year. So that's one reason why it was a little bit odd and stood out to me that we saw a month-to-month increase at this time of year. It just, the seasonal trend I would expect on a month-to-month change would have been a decrease, not an increase. So that was a little bit of a worry. Other things to consider are, in terms of just considering debt, in terms of considering how burdened people are with different kinds of debt, and things that we haven't mentioned here on the show in a long time, are the auto loan bubble. There's a huge number of auto loans out there. Obviously, the student loan bubble. There's an awful lot of stuff out there, and in overall indebtedness. it's a little bit concerning that there seems to be more and more of that sort of stacking up. It kind of makes me just kind of look at it sideways a little bit and wonder if that's something to be concerned about. But I'm just continuing to keep an eye on it. And this particular number, in terms of folks moving into a situation on a month-to-month basis where things have upticked in terms of starting up the foreclosure process, is something I think is worth looking at. So we'll keep an eye on that and see where it goes. And then we'll see if we can't figure out if it has a regional element to it in terms of it happening in one part of the country more than another. All right, folks. I'm very appreciative of those of you who choose to spend your time with me, and I hope that in return I'm able to give you some interesting things to think about in the wide, wonderful world of real estate. Thanks again for listening. Have a fantastic weekend, and I'll talk to y'all next time.